Hey everyone, Brittany Harlow, Verified News Network, VNN here for another VNN Live that we do Wednesday night. Thank you, Verified News community, for joining us on YouTube at Verified News Network and on TikTok at Verified News Network. I don't know how long I'm going to talk tonight, honestly. If you've seen on my social media or other places, kind of talking about this case and what we've been doing and working in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Here for me is where we're headquartered. It's been a rough several months. I'm very drained and exhausted and heartbroken and pissed off and a lot of really draining emotions here from working in this landscape. And before I get too deep into it, we do something every week. I first ask you to be a part of the conversation because that is the most important thing to me, is that community involvement. And without our audience and without you listening, without you subscribing, all we're doing is nothing. We're just talking to ourselves. Whereas we're doing some really important news coverage, we're sending out some very important messages. We want to know what we're missing, what we're doing right, what we could be covering that we're not covering, very important issues, not just here in Oklahoma, but across the country. Send me an email, bharlow@verifiednews.network. Drop a comment in the comments. I'll be following along. I'll also be looking at our TikTok. Hello, everyone. Hi, Mark. Thank you for tuning in with us. Drop your name, your opinions in the comments. And of course, subscribe, verifiednews.network. The only way that we're going to make a difference in combat, especially what I'm talking about tonight, corruption in mainstream news, is by you just subscribing to what we're doing, signing up for our email list, sharing our stories. I don't even know if I should be doing a live right now because I'm just so upset and kind of feeling helpless with the situation. I left television news so that I could tell stories that mattered in a way that is important and beneficial to people. And we've told some great stories, but there's this one story, this April Wilkins case, that is just gut-wrenching from a human perspective and from a news media perspective. So that's what I'm going to be talking about a little tonight. Again, if you're just tuning in, Brittany Harlow, Verified News. We have our own social news media network. It's an app. This week in the app, we have a lot of stories that were posted today, in particular, especially from our affiliates, Muskogee Media, The Frontier here in Oklahoma, as well as Big If True. They had some really great stories hit the news feed today. There's obviously the top story that I wrote, a terrible story that I shared because I'm seeing that. Okay, showing that we're getting some buffering. Honestly, I should be on a new network, but right now I'm on Microsoft Edge, which I wasn't really thinking when I did that. I should be streaming on Chrome, because Edge has always given me trouble, even though that's the one that came default to my computer. I have to pretty much just uninstall the whole thing because Chrome is where it's at, unfortunately. So I'm going to see if I can open this widget now that I think about it. Well, hopefully it'll go back saying that it's poor streaming. That is unfortunate. All right. Hopefully it straightens itself out. All right. And I'm actually going to think about something. Let me email my tech people real quick. I don't even know. Hey, Samantha? All right, I'm just going to check on that. Actually, we'll see if that goes anywhere. All right, sorry about that. Okay. Cool. Um, I shared that story and I wrote that story. I don't really like sharing a lot of negative news. I feel like there's enough negativity in the world. But when I hear stories about 5-year-olds dying in side by side crashes, and I got their name. I didn't publish their name because obviously I feel like that family is suffering enough without seeing their actual government name splashed all over the internet. But I did point out that these people weren't wearing seatbelts in their UTV, and unfortunately, they crashed, and a 5-year-old was killed, and so that happened yesterday. And so that is the top story that you see there. The top stories that I've written lately. I feel like I really wanted this live stream today to be about the progress that we've been making as an independent network and what we've been working on um, as far as really cool revolutionary things, because that's all what we're about, is revolutionizing news media, partnering with communities and collaborating and connecting, and really just kind of being this co-existence, co-benefit to each other as far as what news media is supposed to be like. So we launched a metaverse world and Horizon Worlds, which is owned by Meta, formerly Facebook, and that was a pretty big deal. It took a lot of work. It was really hard, and I was really excited about it. And I'm going to be sharing news like that and what we're working on as far as the tech side and the revolutionizing news media side, and that is really important. But the most important thing is community stories and untold stories, community voices, and being a voice for the people, which the news media, I feel, especially mainstream, is not a voice for everyone, right? They're a voice for some people, that mainstream perspective, but there's a lot of perspectives that are overlooked. And so this story down there that you see that I did, and I'm feeling like if I interact with it, it's just gonna pull up also what it looks like on our YouTube video on YouTube that we had done on it. But April's story, why didn't she stay away? This story is a story that I've been working on, I don't even know, going on a year. We published our first story a while ago on the April Wilkins case. We just published this latest one a week or so ago. And if you're unfamiliar with the April Wilkins case, she was a traumatized, abused woman in a very abusive relationship that went on for 2 years. And, she didn't come from money. She was very dazzled by this man who was the son of a local millionaire. His name was Terry Carlton. That sounds familiar. It's because he was the son of Don Carlton, who owned Don Carlton Honda until some point. I'm pretty sure that I don't know if it was before he died in January or somewhere around there, that he passed his company on to another family member, I think. But for 25 years plus, especially around the time that this happened, very wealthy family here in the Tulsa area. But they dated. He, was very abusive. You have taped recordings of him admitting to assaulting her and raping her, and talking about this, this anger that lived in him that he couldn't get rid of, and all of these things, and was arrested outside of her house with a loaded gun, had multiple protective orders filed against him. Somehow was never multiple chances for the Tulsa police to take him in for an active warrant relating to that gun charge of him being outside April's house on one of the nights that he was stalking her, that a emergency protective order was ordered for her that night. Instead of helping her, the police put her in a mental institution and joked about it. And she eventually got out of the mental institution after, I think, 3 separate stints. And within a very short amount of time. And the last one, when they finally let her go, was when this guy, Terry Carlton, came up to her, uh, the mental institution that they had put her in, flipping out and throwing a fit about her, in front of her. And the people were like, oh, wow, maybe you're not suffering from delusions after all. And so they released her. She left, and I think within 36 hours, she says she was trying to find somewhere to go, but, this guy had been wrecking her house and breaking the locks on her doors and cutting her phone line, so her home, the only place she had to go, was not very safe. She tells me that he bribed her friends not to help her, so she literally was alone. Went to his house, said that she wanted to make peace with him and find a way forward, but he attacked her and brutalized her. And it was during one of those attacks that night. I don't want to keep, getting into the horrible things that he did to her, but they're all in the stories that we covered, and they're very documented in the court system. But she managed to take one of his guns between attacks while she was at his house. As he was attacking her one last time, she ended up shooting him. She shot him a bunch of times and he died. And so you would think, oh, wow, all this evidence, taped recordings of his abuse. That night she had suffered abuse and was brutalized, and she had a rape kit done, and it proved it. She had really extensive damage that happens after you experience trauma like that. She had bruises and markings from being beaten, all the history of the protective orders. I imagine going to her house and seeing all that evidence. But no, they arrested her for murder, and she was tried for murder, and the DA said that she was crying rape despite all of this evidence. And a jury found her. They weren't presented any other option. It was murder or not. No manslaughter option, no any other kind of lesser sentence. She turned down a deal for 20 years because she was so believing of the justice system that they would see how much she had been attacked and how much she had been brutalized. April Wilkins, if you're just tuning in now, the April Wilkins case in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that's been severely covered up and continues to be covered up to this day, 25 years later. She was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison with parole. With parole. She's been eligible for parole multiple times. She's been a model citizen the entire time she's been in there for the last almost 24 years. She cannot make parole. This year, after getting 2 parole hearings in the past, they denied her ability to even get a parole hearing this year. They wouldn't even give her a parole hearing this year. And so now she has to wait another 3 years just to apply for a hearing, whereas again, has been recommended for parole recommendations by parole investigators who make those recommendations, recommending her for parole. She has had a parole hearing the last 2 times she's been eligible, 3 years ago and 6 years ago, and she at least was able to have her parole hearing. This year, they're like, nope, you don't even get a parole hearing this year. But that is not even the worst part about it. That's not even the worst part about this April Wilkins case, is that they locked her up. They never helped her. They didn't help her get out of this abusive relationship. They basically said, you're going to die. Why aren't you dead already? The cops reportedly had even joked, like, oh, we just keep coming to your house expecting that you'll be dead. This April Wilkins case. She said that the cops said that to her back 24 years ago when Terry was still alive, still stalking her and terrorizing her. And the police failed her. The justice system failed her by working very hard to put her away. The DA, the public defender, blasted this woman for, saying, oh, she was a evil woman. She was a drug addict, whereas she was drug tested the day after she killed this man, and she was negative for drugs. But you know who wasn't negative for drugs? The man she killed, who tested positive for heroin and meth. This guy that the DA painted as this, this poor guy that, was murdered by this woman, when in reality, she was the one documented, abused, hurt a lot the April Wilkins case in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and you won't hear about it from anyone else other than the station, other than VNN. We are the only people reporting on this right now, and it makes me sick. And it makes me sick because Don Carlton, Honda, is or was owned by Don Carlton before he died in January, for the last 25 years, has worked to keep this woman in prison by Don Carlton filing, objections to her getting out whenever she's been eligible for parole. Don Carlton Honda, who is one of Tulsa's biggest advertisers for local news media and radio stations. Like, you wonder why you haven't heard about this case in Tulsa, Oklahoma, why I'm the only one reporting on it, is because Don Carlton Honda owns all the local media here. And I'm an independent media station. I'm the only person reporting on it. And it makes me so upset because you're never going to hear the story anywhere other than TikTok, other than YouTube, other than the stories that I'm reporting on it. And that is the biggest failure for April Wilkins, is that in addition to, the jury voted to give her life with parole, which who knows if she'll ever get parole, because now she's not even getting a parole hearing. Obviously, the police failed her. The justice system failed her. I don't even know if it's still called the justice system, of like this whole parole allowing, the prison and parole system, which should allow her to have a shot at getting out one day, has failed her. But the fact that this cannot get coverage because the family of the man she killed owns the media here is insane. I've been working on this for over a year. No one will pick it up. It's gotten so bad that I finally received word that a local station was going to report on this, was going to report on the April Wilkins case here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And they did so much, they interviewed her while she was in prison. They did their due diligence, getting the court documents, and all of this evidence that showed that she was a victim, that she survived this domestic violence, that she survived being raped, that she survived this abuse, and that instead of just letting this abuser, this man, kill her that night, she killed him instead and has been in prison for a murder conviction for killing her abuser ever since. And this story is not reported on in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And it hasn't been reported on in the last 25 years. Recently, within the last week, a local news organization interviewed her, did their diligence, found all those court records, was going to post the story, the last thing that I heard, and now it's just dead. And now it's just, what happened? The story's not running anymore. You're not seeing it on the news here anymore. She was just denied her parole hearing for this year on March 7th. Why isn't the state of Oklahoma talking about this? The state of Oklahoma, who was just voted the worst state for women in the entire country. Like, why aren't we talking about this? And I'll tell you why. It's because every time I get in the car, I hear an advertisement for Don Carlton Honda. And so I reached out to the media contacts for said local news organization, and I asked them, I said, why aren't you, you guys are all set to do the story. It's very timely, it's very newsworthy, it's very local. It is a crazy story that should be going national right now, this April Wilkins case. And I asked them, why aren't you doing anything about it? Why aren't you running the story? Does it have something to do with Don Carlton Honda's advertising dollars? And I haven't got an answer back yet, but I'll tell you as soon as I do. And I'll tell you, that's it. That's why. It's because Don Carlton Honda owns the local media. That's why you're not hearing the story. And I mean, doesn't that just make you sick? Like, when I was, I was like, man, I don't want to talk about this tonight. I've just been living this for the last few weeks and the last month, and I talk to April and I like give her updates. Yeah, we're working on this story. She's interviewed with us in the past stories from prison over the phone, of course. They didn't let us go there. We've been hit a lot of other ways. We asked the DA if we could inspect the evidence, that surely if the police did their jobs, they would have gone to April's house and taken all the pictures of where her house was destroyed. April told me that Terry went into her house and wrote all over her walls and put up crazy sticky notes all over her house. Like, surely if the police were doing their job and not paid off, like April was told they were, then that would all be in evidence. And so I've seen it before where news organizations are able to go inspect, and the DA's office said no. The DA's office said no, you can't inspect the evidence. It's not subject to open records. If April were to have another appeal, then we couldn't let that evidence be jeopardized. But April has filed appeal after appeal after appeal by herself, and the Court of Appeals said she exhausted all of her appeals. So what appeals is there after you are sent a letter that says, sorry, you've exhausted all of your appeals, but the DA's office won't let me look at the evidence because she might have another appeal? Meanwhile, she's sitting there in prison, no appeals left, can't get a parole hearing, even though she's been granted parole hearings in the past. She's only eligible for parole every 3 years. So, this is why I exist. This is why VNN exists. And this is why I'm, forced myself to do this VNN Live tonight, because I left traditional news to find a different way, to find different ways to fund media, to find different ways to support journalism. And it's through you. Like, you're the only hope for actual news media. Like, you out there are the only hope for these stories to get told. Like, this story is literally being blocked by a big, rich company that is controlling what stories are being aired in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So when I had said, I was like, man, what is that? Like, what is that definition? Like, what is that defined? And I'm like, surely it can't be corrupt. It can't be corrupt, because I know journalists. I know a lot of journalists that work for the local networks, for the mainstream news, for the radio and television stations that you hear. These are good, hardworking people who care about stories and who care about journalism, who care about helping people. Like, they're not corrupt. But the fact of the matter is, the whole system is jacked. If you are going to be depending on advertising dollars to exist, then you are going to have to pay the price when people who pay you for advertising say, you can't run this story because it looks negatively on my business. You can't do this news coverage, this story of this woman who has been sitting in a prison cell for more than 2 decades, praying and hoping for justice. And she is not alone in there. There are thousands of incarcerated women across the United States, probably more. A lot of them are in Oklahoma, who had no choice but they had 2 choices: either die or go to prison for fighting back. Like, that's the option that they have here in Oklahoma. And that is a problem. And that is something that could be talked about a lot. Through stories like this, like April Wilkins, who was sentenced to life in prison for killing her abuser. And she's still here. Like, this is something that you hear and you're like, oh, it's 20 years ago. But she literally is still there. She's still there right now as I'm doing this live stream. She's in prison for killing her abuser, and no one is doing anything about it. No one's even talking about it, so, except for me. And her niece, Amanda, who runs the Free April Wilkins blog. If you want a lot of information about the April Wilkins case, this is how I got onto it. I encourage you to go check it out. She has a lot of information, all backed up, court documents, records. You know, the corruption is just like insane with this case. Like, it's not even just the mainstream media who won't run the story because of Don Carlton, Honda being such a huge advertiser for them, but it's even the DA's office way back when who prosecuted the case and fought for April to be locked up, who then Don Carlton later donated to his re-election campaign. The DA, like, how can you put a woman in jail and then take money from the family of the man she killed? Like, but no one, everyone's just going about their lives, women just rotting away in prison for fighting back and refusing to just be beaten to death or killed in other horrible ways. Like, that's okay. I don't understand how it's okay. So that is my live for tonight, talking about corruption, talking about how you can fight it by sharing stories like April Wilkins. You can fight it by supporting local news organizations that tell stories like this. Shoot, you can go to our page, verifiednews.network, and go to the campaigns section and go to our account and donate specifically to the April Wilkins case. Just send a note, say this is for April Wilkins. Like, that would go to telling the story, because that's the only way that the story is being told in Oklahoma right now is through Verified News Network, VNN, where I am one of two reporters that we have in this state. So that's how you fix that. That's how, and I'm working on a lot of other ways to fix that and make news media better and more honest and less corrupt. But until these problems are solved, you're going to have news organizations and networks, television networks, radio networks, that will have very important stories that their advertisers tell them not to do, and they won't do them. So that's all I got to say about that. Thank you very much for tuning in, VNN Live. I'm going to hop off here before I have a coughing fit. I've talked for 30 minutes. I'll catch you guys next time.